This is going to be a demo of using direct measuring to check proportions. And here you can see I'm just going to measure, mark it with my finger on the pencil and transfer it directly over to the page. There's another way where you do this and you hold the pencil out in front of you. I'm not doing that on this video today, but I'll do that a little later. Anyway, so this is the very first step, and you can do this with a still life or a landscape or anything else to make sure it's going to fit on your page and sort of decide where you're going to place it. And even when you're not using direct measuring, you can create a unit on your page that would be your sort of basic unit. Like here I chose the head height from the chin to the top to start with. And then later on in the drawing, I'm using right now the width of the eye from corner to corner. And you'll see me use that again a little bit later. There I was just checking to see what's the distance between the inner corners of the eyes. And often the eye width, the space between the eyes, are equal. And in this case they also are. I'm using the pencil for measurement, but you can see it's not even sharpened. I'm not drawing with the pencil. I'm using Vine charcoal, which is a soft stick of charcoal. I chose this mainly because I have a nice rough textured paper, and also because it'll make a nice dark line, which is great for demonstration purpose in a video or something at a distance, just easier for you to see. But of course you could do the same technique. In some ways it's a little easier with the pencil because the line is much finer. You can see I'm adjusting the head length. Basically, I've just made her head longer by lowering that chin line. I'm not sure how that happened, but it could just be that I shifted her whole face. I shifted her features upward on her head, and really they needed to be lower. But in any case, I drew a new line for the chin, and I'll work with that. Right now I'm like looking at these curves. I'm trying to train myself to draw more with angles and a little bit less with curves, but I'm still doing curves. When you draw with angles to indicate a curve, it sometimes will force you to observe more carefully and just be more accurate. I found that to work for me when I remember to do it, which obviously is not always. So it looks like my page is going to sort of cut off that lower part of her throat, and you'll see I'll adjust this later again when I catch it, but it's forcing me to sort of cram in the details I can see in the photo onto the page, and I'm shortening her neck, which is not accurate, not great. Here I'm drawing the shadows and just really simple shapes that I find around her lips, like the edge of a highlight. Another nice thing about Vine charcoal is it's soft and it makes a mark with a lot of variation. You can make light and dark, and it also erases very easily at first, usually on most surfaces. So you can see where I'm just using my finger to erase. It seems like not a big deal, but it's much faster when you're drawing at this scale to erase that way. So I've discovered that I didn't make her head wide enough, but then as soon as I extended that hair edge out, I realized, yeah, I made her head too wide. So I can either thin it down or I can adjust by making it taller. So I'll probably be doing that soon. It might take me a roundabout way to get there, but eventually I will. So here I am effectively thinning out her head a little bit as I realize that that line of her neck is actually a little closer to the center than how I drew it at first. And here's where I begin to adjust, show a little more forehead and have her head a little taller. So the photo that you see here, I printed out. I found this on a really great app / website that I use often called Unsplash. And you can search for, oh here I wanted you to see the eraser I'm going to use. So I'll talk about that now. This is a kneaded eraser that's spelled Kneaded. And it means that you can squish it. So you'll see me do that a little bit later. So Unsplash is a great app that I use to find photo references for drawing and painting. And one of the great features of it is that if you're a photographer posting your work on Unsplash, you are giving free use to anyone. And if I understand it right, a lot of times free use would include if you're doing something for a class or teaching or you're a student. But it doesn't usually mean that you can use the photo and make something that you then sell. But if I understand the way Unsplash works is that it's free all the way out to selling. So if you made a portrait or a painting using photos from Unsplash, you can sell them without infringing on that photographer's copyright. It's nice to give people credit though. And if I remember, I'll put that in at the end of this video. Now I'm getting absorbed in details of the nose as I draw, but as I watch later I can see I've completely overlooked the head above the eyebrows and I've squashed down the head. It's probably off by a lot, maybe almost an eye length. But one of the things about that I've learned, through years of drawing is to be patient. And even when I see those mistakes, I don't always fix them immediately when they are piling up like that. But everything will wait and you can get to it later. And it doesn't mean you need to crumple up the drawing and toss it. I'm working a little bit of charcoal into the background here. You can see in the photo reference that the background is slightly darker than the highlight on her cheek on the right side there. So the next step is I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and clean my fingers a little bit. And then I'm going to take my sketchbook drawing outside and I'm going to spray it with some Workable Fixative, which is sort of like hairspray for a drawing. In fact, I've heard people say you can use hairspray in a pinch. Now remember how I could wipe away the charcoal, just rub it and erase it with my finger. Once I spray it with Workable Fixative, it won't rub away like that. So I let it dry for about 30 minutes and then I came back. And now I'm going to use a soft charcoal pencil. So it's a 4B. It's pretty soft for charcoal pencils, but it is more hard and a little bit darker than the Vine charcoal that I was using. And it will hold a point. It's sort of more dense. So I've sped up the video here, but you can still see that what I'm doing is hatching. I'm sort of making light lines to create a shape. sometimes you'll see me use the kneaded eraser and nothing happens because I'm trying to erase something that I already fixed with that Workable Fixative spray. So it's probably not going to come up unless I really dig into the paper. Now, if I was my own teacher, I would be saying, hey, don't get so involved in these details of the eyes before you fix that you've made the head too short at the top. It looks like I've got her facial features proportioned okay, but that is a glaring error to me now looking back watching this, and that I've gone into adding more details and shadow shapes without fixing that. It's bugging me, but I'll be patient. And when I draw the lips, there are some times where I will be making lines, but I really try to see broad shapes of shadows and light, and I try to ignore what I know to be the edges of the lips. So sometimes that means I'll be making a shape that doesn't really seem to fit, that doesn't go across the lips the way a lipstick might, but maybe it goes up and down or across both lips or something like that. I'm trying to pay attention to the shapes of the values, independent, at first anyway, of even which lip it's the upper or lower. Here I'm just darkening this whole shadow area. Kind of paying attention to the direction of her hair, the way it falls over her head as I put these lines down, just so that they're not working against what those details will be later. But for now, I'm really just trying to block in a simple large dark shape. And so now as I'm working in the top of her head there, I can see it's time to fix that forehead. And it's not erasing very well because I fixed the vine charcoal part first. So what I'm going to end up doing here is moving up that hairline, trying to expose more of her head. So you can see my old lines there. You can see how far up I've moved that hairline. I've drawn it 3 times already at least, and I'm still not 100% sure it's right. Here I'm trying to correct what I did, sort of cramming too much detail in from that lower part of the photo, which really should be cropped out if I'm going to stick to the true proportions of her head and neck. I'm now going to look more often at the photo on my screen, on my iPad there, to really see into the shadows with more detail. The printout is great for measuring, but it didn't really give me the clarity within the shadows to see those changes in value in the dark areas of her hair and the shadow side of her face or her clothing. So here I'm just deepening the large areas of shadow on that dark side of her face. And even though it's in shadow, this little area between her hair and her ear has a really nice detail. And I'm going to try to emphasize as I go on. I'm using the side of my charcoal pencil most of the time here. Sort of hatching, but doing it softly. And I don't know if you've noticed how long that point was on my charcoal pencil, but it's gotten short. So this is how I sharpen my charcoal pencil. I use a matte knife or a box cutter, and I just whittle away carefully at the point. Depending on what kind of pencil it is, I might leave a lot of the medium inside. In this case, it's charcoal exposed, other times less so. Now I can sharpen the charcoal a little bit if I want to. Probably just leave it since I'm going to be using it on the side anyway. And now I just get rid of all those shavings. And I'm ready to draw again. In this video, I have sped up about twice as fast as real time, but that break I took there, if I remember right, I was just looking back and forth at my drawing and at the reference photo. I'm just spending some time trying to notice what was important, what I liked, and what I wanted to show from the reference photo in my drawing. Here I'm using my finger to change the shape of that shadow a little bit, and also to sort of rub in the charcoal. The paper I have has a lot of tooth, and I can sort of fill in those little white spots by rubbing the paper with my finger. You can also use other tools for this. Blending Stump is something you can find, which is sort of like a solid roll of paper about the size of a pencil, and it can be sharpened more or less with sandpaper to a point, and you can use that to draw also. Sometimes artists use other sort of DIY versions of that, like Q-tips or a rolled up paper towel. Her hair is all very dark, but I do want to note some of those changes in value. So I'm kind of exaggerating the contrast a little bit for now, and later I'll go back in and sort of give it a blanket shadow after I've defined some of those changes in her hair. Here I'm correcting the shape of her forehead. It's going to be tricky to erase, but I can always add a little bit more black. So here, even though this whole area of her clothing is very dark and there's not a lot of contrast, I put down a few lines just to show where those even deeper shadows will go. And it'll give a little more form to her shoulder and the clothing. Something still not quite right about the shape of the nose shadow, the shadow side of the nose. And this shadow on her upper lip is important to define her lip, and I don't quite have that right either. Guess I'll come back to it. So even when I'm working on the eyes, which are small and the details are interesting and important, I try to squint as much as I can and look at the larger shapes wherever possible, squinting and looking at my reference photo. I kind of want to keep the larger masses of shadows around the features accurate before I go in with too much detail. So the background, I'm cleaning it up a little bit here. I've put some value down on purpose because the background is slightly darker than the highlight on her right cheek, or the cheek on her right. And so also when I'm drawing, my hand has smudged all that and kind of made it uneven and messy, which isn't great. One trick you can do is put down a piece of paper under your hand